We begin tonight with major breaking news about Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation. We had been telling you it was all but a sure thing, but news tonight that could make a real difference. Democratic Senator Doug Jones, who's a potential key swing vote, says we should hold off and wait. But most critically, breaking tonight, Republican Jeff Flake tells Politico he's not comfortable voting yes until his committee hears more from Christine Ford. Because it's a party line vote, that's going to have a real impact on how this moves forward. Remember, that vote is scheduled for Thursday. It's all because Christine Ford tells the Washington Post that she is the author of that confidential letter to Senator Dianne Feinstein, alleging that Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh attempted to sexually assault her more than 3 decades ago. Ford, who is now 51 years old and a research psychologist in California, tells the paper that while his friend watched, a drunk teenage Brett Kavanaugh pinned her to the bed, groped her, and attempted to take her clothes off. Ford alleges that when she tried to scream, Kavanaugh put his hand over her mouth, adding, quote, "I thought he might inadvertently kill me." She says she managed to escape when Kavanaugh's friend jumped on top of both of them, sending all 3 tumbling. Ford tells the Post she told no one about the incident in any detail until 2012, when she was in couples therapy. And even then, Kavanaugh reportedly wasn't mentioned by name. Just in tonight, we also have a new statement from the White House saying Kavanaugh still categorically, unequivocally denies that any such misconduct took place. And at this hour, there is no indication that Ford's accusation will derail his confirmation vote. That is still, of course, up in the air. But this question remains. What will senators like Lisa Murkowski, Heidi Heitkamp, and Susan Collins do with this information? Those 3 women have already held the keys to Kavanaugh's confirmation, and we can safely assume this report has not made their decisions any easier. With that, I'd like to welcome in my panel, Washington Post reporter Emma Brown, who broke this story, national political reporter for Axios, Jonathan Swan, New York Times political reporter Lisa Lehr, and senior political reporter for Yahoo News, John Ward. Thank you all for being here tonight. And Emma, I'd like to start with you, since this really pulled this story, an amazing scoop and great work by your team. This clearly was an incredibly difficult decision for Christine Ford. Can you walk us through how this story first came to your attention? The Washington Post got a tip, and then, how this process played out for Christine Ford.
Sure. So she first reached out to us early July when Brett Kavanaugh had made his way to the top of the short list, but was not yet named. A few days later, President Trump, of course, announced him, and she spent much of the summer trying to decide what she was going to do. She felt like she had, as she put it to me, a civic responsibility to come forward, and yet she was terrified of what that would mean for her and her family. Yeah. So she thought about it all summer long. She retained a lawyer. She took a polygraph test to prepare, her lawyer anticipating she would be accused of being a liar should she come forward. And then by the end of August, she just felt like she had made her decision. She was not going to come forward. However, she had sent this confidential letter at one point to Dianne Feinstein, and as word of that started to leak, and there was an Intercept story, and there was a BuzzFeed story, and then, of course, New Yorker, New York Times, like she just felt her privacy.
How did she get to the point where, she's gone through, she's taken all these steps that you outlined, she's done the polygraph, she's talked to the lawyer. I mean, clearly, she had at some point made up her mind, she calls you guys, that she wanted to come forward and have this known. I mean, what was it that made her change her mind after going through all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think she's had this thing in her that wanted to tell her story, and that's why she wrote a letter to Dianne Feinstein, right? And she just also was very terrified of what that would mean for her personally. It's when a reporter started knocking on her door and showing up at her workplace and calling her colleagues. She just felt like, as she put it, these are the ills I was trying to avoid, and they have come to pass anyway, so I'm going to do it.
And has she thought through, or have there been kind of gaming out of scenarios of, okay, what happens now? Does she have to testify before the committee? I mean, is she willing to do that in public?
I have not talked to her about now what. She, obviously, there are now calls for her to come speak to the committee. And I don't know what she will do, but I do know that she has already made the very difficult choice of putting her name out there and being public about her accusation. And so I would not be surprised if she decides she will come speak to the committee.
Okay. Politico Politico is now reporting that the president is planning to stand by Judge Kavanaugh. That's based on conversations with 4 people close to the White House. Politico reports, quote, 3 of those people also said they expect the president to go after Kavanaugh's accuser rather than to turn on the judge. They noted that Trump has done so before, not just denouncing his own accusers, but also attacking those of others, notably failed Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore. The piece goes on, quote, a lawyer close to the White House said the nomination will not be withdrawn. Quote, no way, not even a hint of it, the lawyer said. If anything, it's the opposite. If somebody can be brought down by accusations like this, then you, me, every man should be worried. We can all be accused of something. Lisa Lair, there's a lot there.
There is a lot
in that
there.
Quote. It does seem, I mean, this is a playbook we've seen this president run in his own defense. We've seen him, attack others, accusers, as we pointed out, Roy Moore. But that attitude also is something that really sticks out in the context of the Me Too movement.
Right. So I think you have to separate what's going to happen with the judge a little bit from the politics and take each one separately. I think Kavanaugh could still get confirmed. We don't know, but it seems like that could still happen. But on the politics, I think it is, a lot of people have been referencing back to Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas's hearing. And I think what's interesting there is that in 1992, after Clarence Thomas was confirmed, it was, of course, the first year of the woman. And all these women went out to the polls, motivated in part by the treatment of Anita Hill. Fast forward all these years, we're in this totally different moment. It's this Me Too moment. You have this unprecedented number of female candidates running already. And you really have to wonder how this shakes out for them politically. Like, that statement sounds a little bit, more than a little bit, tone deaf, given, the dynamics of these midterm elections, which are, frankly, not looking all that great for Republicans to begin with.
Right.
And the idea that any man could be accused of I don't even know where to start with that one. I may throw that one to you. It's your show. You can tackle that one, Casey.
Well, yes. Let's just say that I think there are many of us who have been to many high school parties where bad things have happened, who would never level an accusation if it had not happened. And certainly it takes a lot, as Emma has learned through her reporting, to decide to come forward with something like this. Jonathan Swan, what does your reporting tell you about how the White House or Republicans who are charged with defending the judge are going to go forward with this?
After the story broke, I've spoken to 4 people who are involved in the process in various degrees. They were all defiant. Actually, I should qualify that. One of them actually told me they felt a little bit queasy, but then they, within about 5 minutes, were starting to undermine the accuser and why the timing, did you know she's a Democrat, et cetera, et cetera. The rest of them were totally defiant. And I could already see from the conversations where they were heading in terms of rhetorically, Democratic donor, liberal activist, why now? Why did she wait till 2012? Why didn't she name him for the therapist? It's the laundry list. The other point that they'll make, and they have been making, is that there's a list that they've compiled of 65 women who have known him since high school who vouch for his character. So I saw no signs in any of those conversations that they were going to take even an inch of a step backwards. I don't know. I don't have direct knowledge of the president's thinking, but based on everything I know about him from covering him for 3 years, I guarantee you that report is correct. He is not going to back off Kavanaugh.
Lisa, jump in.
I mean, that list I understand why that list was compiled, right? And of course, they want to testify to Kavanaugh's character. But just because someone didn't murder you doesn't mean that they're not. It just seems like there's a logical fallacy there that's pretty easily unpacked. And I think there are a lot of women, across the country who have had experiences that, maybe didn't rise to this level, but this rings personal. I mean, even I can tell you, even in the couple hours since it came out, like I've heard from friends, from other people who say, like, it just rings really true, I think, to a lot of women. And that can be a very I would not underestimate the political power of that.
Yeah, John Ward, weigh in there. I mean, there's going to be a lot of Republican senators who are going to be in a pretty tough spot in the next couple of hours as to how they're going to handle this. And they're either going to have to go out there and say, essentially defend Judge Kavanaugh and say, well, this was however long ago, like, I believe him, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very difficult place to be. And Jeff Flake already saying, hey, I can't vote yes on this until we at least hear from this woman.
Yeah, I think as of tonight, you have to say, or you don't have to say, I would say better than 50% chance he still gets confirmed. But I think that's something you say tonight, because we don't know if this woman comes forward to testify, and if she does, we don't know how that plays out. And there's a strong likelihood that if she does, that's got a pretty good chance of changing things. Now, even if Kavanaugh does get confirmed, I think one thing we can say that's also going to have a big impact is the effect on the midterms and control of the Senate. We're at about a 10-point generic ballot advantage for Democrats now. I think 538 says they need about 11 to have a good shot at control of the Senate. And that could certainly come into play if she comes to testify, and this becomes a bigger issue than it is right now.
If you want to talk about just raw base politics and take morality, the moral dimension of this conversation out of it, it could play actually the other way. If this does stymie his confirmation, Republican-based voters could get really angry and could turn out with real intensity. So we actually don't know how this is going to play politically.
Control of the Senate is up for grabs. Control of the seat. I mean, it's just
Emma, let's talk through a little bit. There are a lot of pieces of this that are in your report, and I spoke to several senators on the phone this afternoon as they were, and a lot of them were learning, quite frankly, right along with the rest of us from your reporting, kind of what was available, the polygraph test, for example, the notes from the therapist that you report on. Is that information going to be, is she going to be willing, to your knowledge, to send that information to the committee if they ask for it? Is that something that we're going to get a chance to see?
I cannot predict. I really cannot predict in this situation, but I can say that the medical records are very, very private, and that those would be, that's a really difficult choice for any person to have to turn that over. And I think, she has. It's a price to pay. Like, she'll have to decide again. She's going to come to another decision point where it's like, how much now are you willing to give, right? If you want to tell your story fully now to the committee, that's going to come with another risk to you. So I don't know what she will decide.
And some of the pushback already focuses on the fact that his name was not in the therapist's notes. How did she explain to you, her decision-making around who to tell about what had happened, whether to name Brett Kavanaugh to those people that she talked to?
Well, I think the fact that his name is not in the therapist notes doesn't mean that she didn't say his name. And of course, she spoke to her husband. That her husband was there. It was couples therapy, and he says he recalls hearing her name in that his name in that conversation. So, and in fact, I got emails today from people who are therapists who said it's not unusual that you wouldn't write down someone's name. I mean, that's not the therapist's interest, right? The therapist's interest is in helping their client or patient work through whatever they're working through. So I don't think the fact that his name is not there doesn't mean she didn't say it in the session.
All right. Well, Emma Brown, thank you so much for your great reporting. I'm sure we'll be talking quite a bit with you some more in the coming days.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.